Some fragrances in the community get a lot of hype prior to their release, hint hint, but then unfortunately disappoints us fans. Today's video is going to be a tribute to at least 10 fragrances that were hyped big time but ended up being disappointments, so you guys can learn about some interesting fragrance related things and maybe have a cautionary tale before you go ahead and blind buy any of these. Let's begin. Now, I know this video is going to be controversial. I'm sure there's going to be some fragrances that I'm put on here that you guys actually really love and enjoy, but I'm gonna just say, guys, this is my opinion. You guys can feel free to disagree and let me know your different views in the comments down below. The first one has to be Aeros Energy. I think this fragrance got announced sometime like in March or April this year. I think they must have had big delays with this project because it feels like they were meant to release this at the beginning of the summertime and something went wrong. A lot of hype for this one, many months of waiting, and people were waiting for a true new Eros flanker since Eros Flame, which came out in 2018, I believe. Aeros Energy, to me, when I saw it, I thought, okay, it's gonna be an Eros fragrance, but it's sort of like it's going to be the Stronger With You freeze of the Eros line. It's very reminiscent of the original DNA, sweet, sexy notes like vanilla in here, but just fresher, you know? A reasonable expectation, I think. And then it just turned out to be a Creed Aventus clone. it's not even a Creed Aventus clone exactly, it's more of a Mont Blanc Explorer clone. It has its own dry, crisp grapefruit up top, which is really nice. It's the best part of the fragrance in my opinion. And then it becomes a Mont Blanc Explorer clone. And I said in my original review, context really matters. Like a Aventus style clone in 2018 makes more sense. But now in 2024, still cloning a 2010 release that has a billion clones already, and the Aeros Energy release doesn't even smell like an Eros flanker. It just sticks out like a sore thumb in the line now, unfortunately. It all just doesn't make sense. The context isn't there, and it doesn't even perform that great. Maybe 6 hours. Like, it's okay, it's not bad. It is a fragrance in the end of the day. It's like a 6 out of 10 is what I gave it in that original review. It's well blended, but it's lacking creativity, it's lacking relevance to the Eros line, it's lacking that excitement. So in my opinion, yes, I think 6 out of 10 is fair, and I'm pretty sure the general consensus is that this was a disappointing release. Next up has to be another fragrance I reviewed recently, that is Chanel's Allure Homme Sport Superleggera, however you pronounce it. I didn't give this a 6 out of 10, I give this a 7 out of 10, meaning it's an okay fragrance, it's decent overall. It's not as bad as Aeros Energy, but it's really expensive for what it is. And the disappointment for this fragrance came from the fact that this was a new Chanel mainline fragrance, the first one in 6 years, which is a lot of hype to carry. Pretty much all Chanel stuff is like a 9 or 10 out of 10 in my opinion. And then Superleggera to me is a 7 out of 10, due to the fact that it didn't feel like a Allure Homme line fragrance in my opinion. A lot of people disagree with that. They say there's a lot of similarities to the original Allure Homme Sports, but I actually don't see it personally. I even had them literally next to me, one hand I had Superleggera, then I was smelling my Allure Homme Sports. I feel like it's actually more of a Polo Blue flanker. I still stick by that. Even when I saw people comparing it to Allure Homme Sport, I literally went back to the station that had the fragrance to try it again the next day, and I'm still getting Polo Blue vibes, that kind of mainstream, boring, generic designer perfumery. It just didn't feel Chanel quality in my opinion. Good performance, good versatility. It was a 7 out of 10, but the price was too high. Disappointing overall, but not horrendous as a release. Oh, and I didn't like the fact that there's a Johnson & Johnson logo on a Chanel bottle. That's a bit weird. 37.9% of people who watch School of Scent are subscribed to us. If you guys really want to see our channel grow, go ahead and click subscribe. Let's get that number to 40%. Thank you. This one's going to be controversial, going to give me a lot of hate now. This is Parfum de Marly's Terre. I made a video about this designated just for this fragrance, and I think I gave it a 6 out of 10 back then. Maybe 6 is a bit harsh, maybe it deserves a 7. But, you know, a lot of people love this fragrance. I can see why. It's mass appealing. It's that direction I don't like about Parfum de Marly nowadays. They're going too safe, more designer friendly rather than niche. Altair is kind of an example of that. It's well made, thick, high quality ingredients, but it just reminds me of something like Hugo Boss Bottled Intense mixed with Mercedes-Benz Club Black. If you smell those two fragrances and then smell Altair, it just smells like a mixture of those two. It's a nice cold weather scent. It'll get you compliments. All these fragrances will get you compliments. They're pleasant. As long as you're not wearing something intensely polarizing, you're usually going to get compliments anyways. But as a collector, we should aim higher than that, in my opinion. So Altair, yes, it's mass appealing. It will get you compliments. It has good performance. I'll give it a 7 out of 10 now. Maybe I'll update my score. But it is disappointing how just, again, it was that lack of creativity for me, especially if you tried those previous fragrances I mentioned. This next spot on the list was kind of weird. I feel like I could have included like 6 or 7 fragrances, but I'm going to say Tom Ford's Ébène Fume, because it's just this general period in the Tom Ford timeline where there were a lot of big fragrance releases with a lot of hype, such as Lost Cherry, Cherry Smoke, Electric Cherry, Ébène Fume, and then there was also other scents like Metallique that all kind of flopped. They just weren't as good as the revolutionary, cool, creative scents in the past of Tom Ford, like Ombre Leather, Oud Wood, Tobacco Vanille, Tobacco Oud. These are the legendary scents from the line. Nowadays, their private line stuff and their mainstream stuff is just rehashed ideas a lot of the times, and even the new ideas just aren't very good. So I feel like Tom Ford are not in their heyday any longer. So Ébène Fume, I kind of just feel like it was a representation of that unfortunate dip in the Tom Ford brand. Ébène Fume to me is a very mediocre fragrance personally. Prada Ocean Eau de Toilette. So this fragrance was a bit weird as well, because Prada is usually quite an elegant brand. They're very consistent. And when you see a release called Prada Ocean, you think, okay, maybe Prada are creating their own sort of aquatic scent. So, 3 issues. First, it doesn't feel like a Prada fragrance. Second, the performance was not that great. It was maybe 46 hours. And third, it wasn't really anything to do with its name. It wasn't oceanic, it wasn't really blue. It was sort of like a quite sexy smelling, in fairness, fragrance that had these very sexy musks, some citruses, this hint of caramel in there, which some people debate whether or not that's an actual note, but I feel like it was a note in there. There was like a sexy woody amber fragrance, which the later flankers seem to just go more heavy into that sweet woody amber. I wasn't a fan of the Eau de Parfum either, the darker blue bottle. But the original to me just smelled weird. It just felt out of place for Prada. When you think of it, the brand that had the original Prada L'Homme, very elegant and soapy. Even Luna Rosa Carbon, which is their Sauvage take, was very elegant. And Prada Amber Plum, one of the most elegant masterpiece fragrances out there. I feel like Prada Ocean just feels really mismatched to what Prada as a brand is. It was an okay scent. I give it maybe a 7 out of 10 back in the day when I reviewed it first. So it was an okay scent overall. I thought it was a disappointing release though, in the end. Maybe you guys disagree, let us know. Hermes H24. This was a big hype beast release that was coming out. Again, there was a big time lapse between the Terre d'Hermès line and the H24 line. It was a big hyped fragrance because there was a lot of Terre d'Hermès flankers, but I don't think Hermès had made a masculine new lineup for many years since Terre d'Hermès. And I think the original Terre d'Hermès came out in 2008, 2006, something like that. So I think it was like, what, over 10 years before Hermès came out with a new line. So H24 was with a new perfumer. We'll have her name on screen. It wasn't Jean-Claude Elena. She had big shoes to fill. H24, I think, had this marketing of being this new, modern, green, urban fragrance. It smells like the city, but urbanized and green and environmental. So it ended up being a very metallic, lime green, clean musk, almost, again, that iron shirt musk-esque kind of vibe. A very nice office fragrance, but nowhere near the masterpiece that was Terre d'Hermès. Whilst Terre d'Hermès was like a 10 out of 10, I feel like the original H24 was a bright, warm weather office scent that was more like a 7 out of 10. It was okay, but the big shoes to fill really may have been very menacing for the brand, because I just don't think it matched the hype in the end. To me, it does seem like the Eau de Parfum is a bit better, and the Herbe Vives is a little bit better. It has an interesting pear note in there, I think. They're very similar. I think the Eau de Parfum is probably the best concentration right now. I'd have to try them again, but yeah, generally the H24 line, I think, just kind of felt a little bit flat as a line. What do you guys think? Dolce & Gabbana, the one Eau de Parfum Intense. Hype for this release because the one Eau de Parfum is one of the most loved date night fragrances in the community. You see a release coming out saying the one Eau de Parfum Intense that will finally fix the notorious performance issues of the one Eau de Parfum, even though the one Eau de Parfum should already be the intense version of the Eau de Toilette, which also had even worse performance. But hey, okay, EDP Intense, let's go. This is gonna fix the longevity issues. We're finally gonna have the one flanker we've always wanted. And then it kind of just fell flat. I had a bottle of this, and then I even got a recent sample of it again, and it reminded me, yeah, it's just a really mediocre fragrance. It's actually a cleaner take on the DNA. It could be like your day or night signature, but it just felt very generic. It didn't have the complexity or the beautiful skill of the blend that was made in the one Eau de Parfum. I'm not sure if there was different perfumers, or I think it was a collaborative effort, something like that, but it just fell flat. It wasn't as sexy. It wasn't what people were expecting. It was quite generic. So I think the one Eau de Parfum went from being like a 9 out of 10 to the one EDP Intense would have been like a 7 out of 10 if I had to give them a score now off the top of my head. So yes, it was disappointing. Maybe you guys agree as well. Do you guys remember the hype for this fragrance? Do you agree with me that it was a disappointing release or no? I'll shortly cover this one. I'm going to say Marc-Antoine Barrois Ganymede Elixir. I got a sample of this for our recent Marc-Antoine Barrois buying guide, which I don't think was actually very recent at all. I think it was many months ago now we did that. But I can't even remember the fragrance that well. But I just remember it smelling weird, not that similar to Ganymede. Ganymede is already quite a thick, intense release, quite mineralic and musky, metallic. I thought maybe the Elixir would be a bit more sweet, more like a nighttime take on it, but it just ended up being its own weird thing. I think it was more spicy or just stinky. I'd have to go back to that original buying guide to remember what I said. A lot of people say this kind of smells like curry powder, and I can kind of see what they mean, but I remember it being a complete flop. I think it just flopped entirely in the community. People talk about Ganymede, but you don't ever hear people talking about Ganymede Elixir, to the point where actually at one point I didn't even know it existed. So there you go, guys. I think that says it all. This one's gonna be super controversial, Dior Homme 2020. I said it when it first came out, this smells like a poor man's Bleu de Chanel. People argued with me, said no, I bought a bottle, wore it many times, it is a poor man's Bleu de Chanel. I stick by that opinion. It smells, first of all, nothing like the original Dior Homme line, so that confused people. I got a lot of hate in the community for that because it was misleading. It didn't have that iconic iris of the original. It was a different line using the original line's name, which is a little bit deceptive, I would say, because it has nothing to do with the original. And now we have Dior Homme Original, which is now confusing things even more because now it's a completely different fragrance, Dior Homme Original, which I prefer. That is the original Dior Homme from 2005. So that's the one I recommend. Dior Homme 2020 feels like an incomplete fragrance. I feel like Dior Homme Sport 2021 is what Dior Homme 2020 should have been. To me, that was a disappointing release. It was a very disappointing release, I think, in the beginning. I think it got more hype and appreciation later on, especially with the TikTok crowd, in my opinion. So it's good for the younger crowd, but I still would just say get Dior Homme Sport 2021 or Bleu de Chanel. YSL Y Elixir. Now, the YSL Y line has way too many flankers for anyone's business. It doesn't need that many flankers. Y Elixir, though, was coming on the hype of the Elixir craze after Sauvage Elixir started it all off. There were some good Elixir releases, such as Gucci Guilty Elixir, Victory Elixir by Invictus, as well as Hugo Boss Bottled Elixir. Some solid releases out there. Y Elixir just ended up flopping completely. Everyone saw that it was going to be a Y flanker with oud in there with a higher price tag. Everyone got excited for real oud, and then most people didn't even think that there was real oud in there. They couldn't really detect it. Everyone pretty much agreed it's overpriced. So maybe nowadays it is better value if it's on discount. I think it's a very long-lasting flanker. I think it's still quite sexy. It sort of, to me, smells like Y EDT, the very first Y fragrance, mixed with a synthetic oud note, but I do think there could be potentially a hint, the tiniest hint of real oud in there. I would say if you can get that fragrance on discount, it might actually be worth it. It's not a bad scent overall, but I think it's safe to say it was disappointing. That's the last fragrance on the list, guys, but I'll give two honorable mentions. First one's gonna be Spice Bomb Night Vision Eau de Toilette. This came on the heels of the big hype that there was for Spice Bomb Extreme. Everyone and their dog was talking about that fragrance. And then Spice Bomb Night Vision, the first fragrance, was a complete flop. The Eau de Parfum was better, but the first one, Night Vision, smelled like a patchouli spicy fragrance. I can't even remember it that well. That's why it's in the honorable mentions section, because I just can't remember it. It was so forgettable. Had a slightly interesting opening and then just fell flat really quickly. It's dried down to some really generic vanilla. That's what I think I remember. Do you guys remember this flanker? If not, I wouldn't blame you. And then lastly, Sauvage Eau Forte, which to me had a lot of hype for it. This was Francis Kurkdjian's first creation as the new director of perfumes in the House of Dior, in the main line at least. I think he made a private line sent for them as well before then. But everyone got hyped. A new Sauvage, water-based, no alcohol, Francis Kurkdjian, master perfumer, and it ended up being a flop. I put this in the honorable mentions because Pretty much everyone says it's a flop. I still need to try it. I haven't tried it, but it just seems so overwhelmingly agreed upon that it was just a weird scent. Apparently it doesn't smell like Sauvage, doesn't last at all, it's completely overpriced. I looked at the reviews, I was shocked. So I still should try it, but because the overwhelming response was negative, I've kind of put this on the back burner. Hopefully I will try it eventually, but let me know, guys, do you agree that this was a disappointing release or not? And that concludes this video, guys. I thought it would just be an interesting topic to mention these fragrances. Maybe I'm being unfair to some, maybe you guys disagree, so let me know in the comments down below, guys. And also let me know, what other fragrances do you feel like had a lot of hype coming to them before they came out, and then when they did eventually arrive, they ended up being really disappointing? Let us know your inputs in the comments down below as well, guys. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my previous video on fragrances I wish I purchased much sooner. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.